Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. Just to update on that, I actually live in Miami. It's been about 3 years now, but just for you to know. I moved over about 15, 16 years ago from the UK, settled in Washington, short stint in New York, and now very happily living in the Sunshine State. So our firm has its first office that opened up in Washington, D.C. We started out as a sanctions practice, dealing with economic sanctions that the Treasury had on Iran largely. I'm born in Iran, but raised in England, and we were helping US companies that were still doing business under the sanctions program. And EB-5 happened to turn up and really become a hot topic in, I guess it was '08. So when the financial markets sort of shrank, lending became difficult, the program expanded and grew to being oversubscribed, as it is in the past 2-3 years. I have Carolina here, who's one of our attorneys. She speaks Portuguese. And we have associate offices in Vietnam, Saigon, China, and soon Dubai. So I'll get right into it. So what's the EB-5 program? And the program, when you ask that question, it depends who you're asking. For the government, it's a jobs program. They're trying to create economic activity in areas that are underserved. For an investor, they are trying to get security. Usually they're leaving somewhere where it's insecure, or there's no social security, there's no economic security or political security. So they see the US as a safe haven and somewhere where they can come, bring their family, live, and protect their assets. And from the project owner, it's another source of funding, an alternative one, or a complementary one. So there's 10,000 visas a year. Past 3 years, all 10,000 have been taken up. The cost of entry is, in most cases, $500,000, but you can invest anywhere for $1 million. And it really depends on the location of that business. The program, I don't know if some of you are aware, but there's a lot of changes happening. There has been some naughtiness by some of the project owners. Some of these projects are not really located somewhere where there is a requirement to have economic activity. So there are going to be changes. And most likely, these numbers will change. 800,000 is what most people are talking about, with 1.2 million being at the higher end, and making locations where you can have a business being much more restricted. I mean, at the moment, there are projects downtown Manhattan, right on Central Park, EB-5 money is being used. Clearly, I think they would get funded with or without the EB-5. So although they qualify today, as lawyers do, they help people figure out how to get the best out of it. And the spirit of the law is really not being upheld. So the government wants to change that. They really do want to make sure that the funds are going into areas that really require them. And if it was not for the EB-5 money, the project wouldn't be happening. Of course, from an investor standpoint, this increases the risk. And it will take some time for people to adapt, get used to that. But really, the government didn't want to create a program where your money's guaranteed, and in fact, the capital must be at risk, so there cannot be any guarantees for the investor. Let me just move on. Okay, so I'm not going to get too much into the legal process on what's required, document-wise, step by step, but essentially, the US government wants to make sure that your funds are clean. And what does that mean? It's not linked to terrorism, drugs, arms sales, anything that would really, we wouldn't want anyone as a client, whether it's a KYC that we're doing from a law firm perspective, and they don't want to be giving green cards to anyone like that. There's some articles in the press that, you know, foreign spies are infiltrating the US with this. I don't see it being, I think it'll be a lot cheaper to get them in other ways than to do an EB-5 visa for them. But there have been cases where people are coming through the program that have perhaps committed immigration fraud in the past. And again, this goes back to the regulatory changes that are going to probably take effect. So investor submits their documents. They have to prove that the source of their money is good, it's clean. It doesn't necessarily mean they need to show tax returns. It all depends on the cultural norm. So if we have clients coming in from, let's say, India, and on their wedding of the parents, she received a lot of gold, we can document that. If they're coming in from Afghanistan and they keep their money under the mattress, because a couple of years ago the Bank of Kabul embezzled about $2 billion of depositor funds, it's okay. So you talk about what's the cultural norm in that economy, and you go about documenting it in that fashion. There is no country that cannot apply for an EB-5 visa. So it's open to any person whatsoever. The investor, their spouse, and unmarried children under the age of 21 all get the green card with the same single investment. Process takes quite a long time right now. It really depends where you're from as well. If you're coming in from China, you're looking at about a 3 to 4 year wait before you actually enter. If you're coming in from a country that's under sanctions, such as Iran or Syria, you're looking at around the same time frame. If you're coming in from Brazil, Vietnam, it's much faster. You're looking at about 2 years. So it really depends on where the client's coming in from. The process starts in the US. It's not at the consular level at the beginning. So it's different from an E2 visa, which you may have heard of. The interview happens after the visa's been approved as opposed to beforehand. It takes about 17 months for the US government to respond on the case. Usually they have questions, especially if they're running behind, which they generally are. So they will send some questions, may add another 3 months to the case, but then they go to the consulate, have an interview, very simple interview. It's not like an application for a job where they're going to scrutinize the client, the candidate, to see whether or not they have the experience. They don't need to speak English. They don't need to be educated. 5 minutes. Oh, I better hurry up. Okay. All right. So we discussed this. There's the source of funds, and then there's the tracing of the funds, how it actually arrives here, the money trail. Again, it doesn't matter if it doesn't go through a traditional banking system. Most money that comes out of the Middle East, which, you know, we have a lot of clients coming in from there, comes through a system called Hawala, where no money is actually moving out of the country. Someone needs to send money there, another person needs to send money out. They ask the other person, you send it here, and the person in the home country pays the person that person outside needed to pay. I don't know if you caught that, but not that difficult. Okay, project owners. So it's not free money. It's complementary source of capital, but it's certainly not free. And it really does depend, as a project owner, what the size of your project is. If you're trying to raise, as Related did in New York, $800 million of EB-5, which they did successfully in 6 months, they have to go to China. China is the only country which has that type of volume. That kind of volume doesn't exist anywhere else, and the Chinese account for 85% of all the EB-5 visas coming out. Vietnam is a second, but nowhere close. All the other countries share the 15%. So if you're in China, it's going to cost you money because there are immigration agencies over there, which are really private equity firms. They're already investing funds for Chinese nationals, and they may offer this as another service that they do. And they charge. So there are fees involved. And based on the speed of the raise and the size and the risk, and they will underwrite it just like you going to a bank, and you're looking at generally around 4 to 10%, depending on the risk that's involved, and whether your funds are being placed as equity or debt. So you can receive funds as equity, goes into the project, they're your partners, or as debt, and it usually sits in second position after the senior loan in the capital stack. The terms, 5 years, 7 years, there's always usually options to extend, and that's related to the process for the investors, because if they haven't received a permanent green card by the time they get their money back, they can't get the permanent green card. So there are always options in these term sheets to extend them for 1 or 2 years. Non-recursive, let's go to the next one. Okay, so I don't know if you can make that out, but China, you can see, is the big elephant in the room. A huge amount of visas coming out of there. In fact, so many that now they have what's called retrogression. So it takes about another 1.5 years before their priority date, which is what's called in immigration terms, comes up and is valid. But Middle East, always been quite strong. And it's really related to political situations overseas. So as you see problems happening in Syria, there's capital flight. The capital goes to Dubai. Then they realize, you know what, Dubai, I can be here 20 years and I still won't get a passport. You'll get residency, but it can always be taken away from you at any time. And once they realize that's the case, and also with all the things going on with ISIS and this, that, and the other, where is the safe haven? The safe haven's the US. And we're seeing a lot of Europeans coming through the program now who are actually based out of countries which aren't taxable, such as Dubai. Because of FATCA, it's creating, for foreign national, non-US persons, this is becoming a banking hub like the Swiss were before. Because the US banks still won't disclose who the UBOs of their accounts are, even though the US is forcing everybody else to do so. So it's very quite clever what they did, but they've made the US a Swiss banking center. Iran, always been very strong there as well. Brazil's becoming much more popular. This is a little bit old, this is from 2013, but Brazil last year was very strong. Venezuela, not so much anymore. Next. So regional centers. 95% of people go through what's called the regional center program. You can do a direct investment yourself, or you can invest through what's called a regional center, which is essentially a license to have investments within a geographical area that's predetermined and approved by USCIS. There are over 1,000 now. It's so many created every day, many shutting down, because if you don't have an investment happening after about 1 or 2 years, they will close down your center. You have to make sure that it's active. Some regional centers are owned by the project developer. Some regional centers are simply leased out to any project developer that wants to come in. Takes about 12 to 18 months. Florida is the second most active RC market. California is #1. Florida, very popular with Latin Americans. The Chinese don't tend to finish. 1 minute, okay. So the Chinese don't tend to come here yet because there's no direct flights. And in most cases, until there is, they're not going to come. So you're going to have, they like Chicago, they like DC, they like San Francisco, Seattle, billions of dollars. Let's see. Direct investments, so I'll go very quickly between the difference between the two. With the direct one, clearly you're managing your own funds, you're responsible for creating the jobs. With the regional center program, which is what these individuals really want, they're not interested in coming here and running a business. In most cases, they have a very successful business overseas, and they just want to get the green card. They're not motivated by a financial return with an EB-5. The regional center program is what the government prefers you to do, and because of that, they give you direct, indirect, and induced job creation. So for every investor, you must create 10 investment. You've got to create 10 jobs per investor. With the regional center, you will say, you'll have an economist do an impact study and say, because of this X amount of investment in this geographical area, there will be a regional impact, and this many extra jobs will be created. The restaurant across the street will make more money, the cab drivers, the dry cleaners, etc. I think we're done, right? We're done. Yeah. I kept getting look. Okay, well, thank you very much. There we go.